Griffin,
Here.
Hazy,
Present.
McCormick,
Present.
Mooney. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. This Finance Committee is nothing more than an update. It's been a while since we've had our budget update. And as we get towards the end of the year, I want everybody to have a sense of what 2020 might close out to look like. And everybody should be thinking about what 2021 might look like as well. As we all know, there will be a supplemental and transfer ordinance before the end of the year. They're going to be different this year because our budget has changed quite a bit since March. So that's the only agenda item that I have for today. With that, I will ask Chief Dumas to tell us what she's got.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of council in the audience. What we're going to talk about a little bit today is really most of the things that you're already associated with, which is the environment in which we're operating. What Andre has just put on the screen is our October 2020 report. What we forwarded to you guys in the same format is September and October. The only difference between the two is that September has a third quarter vacancy report. And because we were doing those quarterly to include in that. So that's the only thing that's different in September. In October, of course, we have more recent numbers. So it wouldn't make sense to go all the way through September and then do the same thing for October. So in a general sense, the things that you're already familiar with, all of our revenue sources, and I want to be clear on that, given the COVID pandemic environment, all of our revenue sources declined, okay, because operations really and collections have come to a standstill. But the areas that we have the most decline in, of course, is our hospitality taxes, since there are no entertainment type things, no sporting goods, no sporting games, no conventions, no hotel uses, no rental car uses, since all events because of the COVID epidemic have been canceled. So our original projection in 2020, when we started back in January, is that we had anticipated 40.8 million, and we're actually going to collect 18.8 million. So in hospitality taxes, which are admission taxes, rental cars, parking taxes, hotel taxes, we're losing ground on those because of the current epidemic. So we're down 22 million as it relates to hospitality taxes. The other huge hit or big hit would be on income taxes. And that, of course, has to do with loss of jobs in the area and because of the shutdowns. And that amount that we had projected was 444.3 million. We're coming in at we're projecting 409.9. So we lost 34.4 million. So the conjunction of those two together is 56. And if I add in the variances from some of our other sources, we're probably going to be around 65 million in terms of what we anticipated and what will happen. Now, given that we had some relief from the CARES Act and COVID funds to all the municipalities, including us, of course, and we also had some give back on workers' comp, all right? And those funds we were able to use in our operating budget to defer some of our costs. Now, given that we also had done collectively some reductions, those things all fared favorably for us. So I'm going to start on the report, but I want to give you one little summary. What we had anticipated our expenses to be in 2020 were 675 million. What they're going to come in at is about 646 million by way of expenses. We had anticipated that our revenue would come in at about 675 also. Revenue is going to come in at about 646. So we're going to plug some of that loss by transferring some of our costs as allowed under the CARES Act, and have a sheet in this report as it relates to the CARES Act. That's for fiscal 2020. For fiscal 2021, talk a little bit about that. You can anticipate a same level of operating, which means that currently we're operating at a level of about 86%. And that's what we're going to go into 2021 at. We're going to assume the same losses because there's been no opening up of our economy. So we're not going to get in the hospitality taxes. And, people are letting people go. Businesses are closing. And so that lost revenue on income tax appears to that it's going to be the same in 2021. What we cannot anticipate in 2021 is additional COVID funds or CARES Act funding, because we don't know if they're going to allow that or not. And of course, we'll continue to have our challenges as it relates to entities that attempt to divert our income tax revenue away from the core city and to some suburban areas. So we'll continue to address that in 2021. And those of you with history know that there's always some challenge to our income tax collection. So this one is not new. It's just kind of a new basis. And
Mr. Chairman?
Councilman?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Director, that was, you're anticipating a level of operating at 86%? Was that the number?
That is correct. That's a staffing level. Okay. So that means the number of bodies. So that's a staffing level at 86%, not a budget level. Okay. Not a dollar level.
Okay.
And I'll get into that a little more.
All right. Thank you.
So I think best to go through the report first, and then I'll go back to talk a little bit more about 2021. So you can see Andre posted on the first page, page 1, the budget to actual. And I give this to you guys so that you can have some sense of where we are from the beginning of the year and where we look like we're going to end up. So each one of these are by month. You get this report monthly. And so you can see that on our anticipated revenues of 675.7, we're currently at 511.1 million with 2 more months of operating to go. And our percentage, you can see, is at about 75%. We anticipate that expenses will be at 507, 510 at the end of October. And again, we have a couple more operating years to go. Operating months to go. Andre? Okay. The financial overview is kind of a healthcare. If you remember, we went to self-insurance in order to save money several years ago. So it kind of just tracks for you our healthcare numbers. And while we do have departing employees, which I share with you guys, when employees depart, they kind of do any of their healthcare needs before they have to switch to another kind of healthcare. But we are doing well. And I attribute that to, some of the programs that are in place for, healthy starts and healthy maintenance of lifestyles. Our chronic diseases are going down. And I attribute that these savings or this cost factor that will probably be in line with 19 or a little bit lower. So we'll be in good shape here. Andre? So unencumbered cash kind of tells you guys at the beginning of the year how much money each one of these funds had as unencumbered cash, and then on a monthly basis, how much unencumbered cash, and we use that for tracking. So it also gives me the ability to track their spending so that if I can see if they're spending too fast, because of course we try to maintain and not lose our unencumbered cash position because we generally produce and support structurally balanced budgets in each one of these areas, unless there's something major like a capital need or something. So you can see on the part of the general fund that we started the year at 43,801. And in October, our unencumbered cash is 48,130. And that has to do with the COVID funds that we've gotten in for and able to transfer some of our cost as a result of that. Towards the end of the year, which will be this month and early next month, we will be paying, most of our contracts have settled, and we will be paying before the end of the year, SEIU. The pattern was 222. And in terms of benefits and all that, they kind of stayed the same. So we'll be paying SEIU. EMS settled 2 contract years. So it'll be 6 years of EMS that we'll be paying before the end of this year. Local 93 has settled and we'll be paying them before the end of this year. And then exempt employees will be paying the pattern of 2, 2, and 2. Now, quite naturally, the 2, 2, and 2 is 2% in 2019, 2% in 20, and then 2% coming up in 2021, and then any retro associated with that. And so all of our large unions, the CPPA unexpectedly came in quite early in the year. And then with them kind of setting the pattern, we were able to bring in everybody else. I shared with you guys that many of my counterparts, when COVID hit, they stopped contract talks altogether because, of course, revenue was going in the wrong direction. And we continued ours, but we did get the pattern that we were looking for. So in fiscal 2021, you're going to see a bump that is approximately 5.5% in the base pays. That reflects the settlement of the contracts for 19, 20, and then of course 21 doesn't start till April. So you're looking at, you know, an 8-month, and so it's not a full 2%. It's like a 1.5%. So you'll see a 5.5% bump in the base when we start looking at 2021.
Director, before you go to your next items, Councilman Kerry McCormick had a question on that.
Okay.
Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, Chair to the Director, you speak on it very briefly, but looking at unencumbered cash in the utilities, for example, can you explain in a nutshell why it's important to have that? Is it important? Is it the utility just stocking it away for, you know, can you just touch briefly on why that money or what the purpose of that is and why it's important?
So just as you would not, Councilman, balance your own personal funds to zero, you would want to have some reserve every month. We don't do that, of course, on a municipal level, but there is a larger reason also. If something happens with operating, you have to have some reserve, and generally the guidance speaks to 3 to 6 months of operating cash in the event that something catastrophic happens, like a pandemic. You also are required by some of your debt service that's outstanding to have X amount of payments of debt service, 1.5, 2 times of annual debt service in your reserves. And they look to your operating and your unencumbered cash to see if in fact you are a safe investment. They use that to generate what your rates will be on borrowing and what your rating will be on your overall operations and your bonds and things that you have outstanding in those areas. So you do have to have unencumbered cash. It is a requirement, and it should meet 3 to 6 months of your operating expense and should support your debt services that's outstanding in accordance with whatever language is in each indenture.
Thank you. And so, Chair to the Director, having a certain level of unencumbered cash is not, and this is for public clarity per point, is not some frivolous activity. It is critical for both, right, you know, what is needed for financing purposes, making sure the city's rates are as low as possible, so we're not spending a lot on interest rates, as well as having emergency funding, so that if something happened, you wouldn't be essentially bankrupt.
Right, and that is absolutely correct, Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Plenzik, anything further on this issue?
Yes, can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable colleagues. To the Director, I want to go back to the CARES Act COVID-19 funds. What was as of this point, the total amount that we received?
Okay, in the October report, the report that you have in front of you, I gave you the last 2 pages. I gave you the total amount of COVID funds that we have received and the categories in which they have to be spent, the eligibility. And so the total amount of COVID funds that we have received on page 10 is 135 million for fiscal 2021. Now, each one of the grants or the COVID fund, CARES Act funding have different restrictions, different spending time. Some don't overlap into 2021, some have a shorter period of time. But 135 million of CARES Act, and then I outlined for you where each amount of that money has to be or will be expended.
Okay.
It's in the report, so you can see it.
Yeah. So, and then as you indicated, Mr. Chairman, you don't believe, you believe these funds will stop at the end of the year?
I don't actually know. You know, you've got a change in administration at the federal level, and they've had some conversations around stimulus packages, which is, you know, kind of where the CARES money comes from, but they haven't really moved on any yet.
Okay.
So I don't know what will happen in 2021. Councilman, the environment is the same. We'll continue to lose economic development momentum. Our economy is still suppressed. I won't say depressed, but suppressed. And of course, people are still losing their jobs. Businesses are closing. So the condition is the same under which they gave stimulus funding. And of course, the pandemic, which requires, a lot of planning around how to safely handle testing and vaccine distribution and individuals to do contact. All of that still exists, which was a motivation behind the CARES funding, but I don't actually know that they will give additional funding in 2021.
Okay. So then I don't know if I can ask it now or if you're going to have some presentation as pertains to filling vacant positions. Will you address that in the course of this, or can I ask that question now?
You can ask me now.
Good.
You can ask
Yep.
me now.
Okay.
There in the
Yes, correct.
September report, there is a vacancy report. We will be maintaining the same level of vacancies in 2021 because our cash doesn't change, right? So in the event that there is some essential function that is not being done because of vacancies, or if the department needs to swap out vacancies for some positions, we'll entertain that to make sure that they're able to deliver their service. But the funding level will be the same, which means it can only support X amount of positions. And what we did in this was to not diminish public safety or public health during 2020, and we're not anticipating doing that in 2021. Now, what that means squarely is we did not cut any positions or enforce vacancies, maybe a couple of administrative ones, but not any police officers, firefighters, or EMS workers. So the vacancies that we're enforcing are in the other part of the city's operations.
Okay, well, and that was my biggest concern as it pertains to the division of police, because with the number of officers that have left this year, and last time I looked, it was over 100. I want to make sure that we're able to fill the basic car plan. I want to make sure we're able to fill the critical positions in the most serious and most important units that we have. So, and then again, in light of the fact of the number of firefighters that have come down with COVID-19.
Yes.
I want to make sure that, we have adequate fire protection and that that the administration is looking at these numbers of the officers that have left through retirement or attrition as we're going into next year. We've got to maintain a staffing level that is adequate for the protection of our citizens. So I'm greatly concerned, especially as it pertains to police, with regard to the growing crime rate that we see out there. So, and especially the homicide rate. So I know as we go into the budget hearings, this is something we've got to look at very closely. We've got to maintain a significant staffing rate there. Thank you.
Thank you. Director, back to you.
Okay, so if you look at the other columns as it relates to unencumbered cash, and again, Councilman McCormick, we try to have them expend on a calendar year the amount of money that they would have coming in so that they keep their unencumbered cash at an appropriate level. Sometimes that does not work when you have a pandemic and you have loss of revenues. Sometimes it doesn't work in some of our utilities when they have some large capital thing that happens that they have to devote some money to that. But for the most part, you can start looking at the beginning of the year in water at 199 million. They're ending the year at 181. And WPC reads the same way, and so does CPP, and so does Port Control. Now, Port Control started at 80 million. This number that we're projecting at the end of October includes their COVID funding. They got about 43 million, I believe, in COVID dollars. And so that includes their COVID dollars. So that's why that number looks like it's an increase from what was before. Okay, Andre. Okay, so the next 2 pages give you we generally track our overtime. And of course, most overtime is used in public safety in terms of the dollar amount. And so we track overtime by pay period. So these next 2 pages just give you by pay period what they've expended on overtime. And that's how we can tell if they're trending in the wrong direction, if we need them to cut back. And then if you go to page 6, you'll see that we totaled it and summarized it for you, okay? And so where the Division of Police is concerned, at the end of October, they're at 89%. So they're not trending, in a direction that looks, very bad, which means that they just didn't expend a bunch of overtime in the summer months, means we had no protests or big, huge emergencies that they hadn't accounted for in their original ask. And fire, the same thing. You see them at 8.3, and through the end of October, they've expended 6.1. So they're in alignment. EMS at the beginning, 3.8, and they've expended 2.7, and they're in alignment. We always kind of have the $500,000 for waste collection, but they've actually trended at around $1 million to $1.5 million. They have some internal staffing issues that they've had for a number of years. And so they always kind of trend in that direction. So that's not unusual. And then same thing, street construction is $1 million and they're at 864. So in the transfer ordinance, generally, what we would have to address is something like this. If in fact police came in way over on overtime, or fire came in on overtime, or something that we didn't anticipate in our estimates that actually happened, I believe this year's transfer ordinance will show the impact of having settled all of our contracts, so that if there is not enough dollars in that individual budget to cover fires, contract settlement, or EMS's contract settlement, or SEIU's contract settlement, that's where you'll see some additional funds going into those budgets to cover those settlements. And you'll also see that bump in the base in fiscal 2021. So the transfer ordinance will be a little different this year. You're going to see, again, the settlement of the contracts. In 2021, you're going to see the bump, the 5.5%. You're going to see a small, I believe it's small this year. I believe next year it's like almost 700,000 additional transfer to West Side Market because of the rents that were forgiven. Same thing at the airport, where they got an additional revenue to help with their closed operations. So you're going to see a small transfer in 2021 to Market, and you're going to see a larger transfer in the transfer ordinance to telecom. Telecom is the budget which we charge all of our IT stuff. So of course, with the remote working that was imposed on us from the coronavirus edicts and the stay-at-homes, we had to buy laptops. We had to do a bunch of stuff with our systems to allow us to work remotely. And so
I'm going to pause for just a second.
Sure.
Councilman Brancatelli and Councilman Griffin have questions. Councilman Brancatelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize. I have Spectrum cable, and when the wind blows, so does my cable service. And I missed when Chief Dumas was about to give out the rose and said on overtime, we are not exceeding our overtime. We're actually under our overtime estimates, Chief?
That is correct, through the end of October. So provided nothing happens in November. Yeah, exactly. Nothing happened with the debate that made us be, significantly over. So hopefully nothing happens between now and the end of the year. So those are the areas that we address in transfer.
And we didn't have any of our festivals and all the other things that kind of chew up overtime as well.
Exactly. All those.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, Councilman Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And she sort of answered my question about, are any of these costs associated with the debate, or are we recouping any of these costs from Cleveland Clinic or Case Western Reserve in regards to the debate?
I know that the Division of Police Director Howard has computed the amount of overtime that was incurred during the debate. Again, not excessive, because there weren't situations, there wasn't violence and, things that would have required more. And I know that he has, or is in process of, billing the Cleveland Clinic and Case Western. And I believe the amount is someplace between $500,000 and $600,000 in total for all of public safety, which would include police, fire, and EMS.
Okay, so that really that's going to be negligible in these numbers that we see here now, even if we recoup those costs. So this is pretty much strictly city costs and not attributed to the debate and those other things.
Well, it is attributed to the debate in that it is in that number for the amount expended, because Councilman Griffin, when they work it, we have to pay it in the next pay period, right? So it is paid in that $12 million number. What we're hoping to get is reimbursement. And if we get reimbursement, then that money will come in and it'll be on our revenue side, having received some reimbursement for that number. But the number I gave, the 500,000 to 600,000, it's in these numbers.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, to the director, I know you kind of touched on it, but waste collection up 209%. And I think I noticed before that there are 47 staff members down.
Yeah.
Can you kind of touch on that again? And why are we having such difficulty over in waste?
I can't actually speak factually. I can only say that I know they have high injuries. They have a lot of people out, and this is year after year. They have a lot of people out on injuries, workers' comp, illness. And I think I've always thought that the demands of the job, even before we got kind of the electronic trucks, that pick things up, I think the demands of the jobs over time wear on those individuals. There hasn't been huge swings in this number, and they've always been down a lot of people. And even when we bring on a lot of people, there's still a lot of injuries and people out on sickness. So that's kind of I'm going to say more, when you do talk to Public Works, but I think that's kind of it. I think they are out on illness. I think they're out on workers' comp. And then as a result of that, the people that are working are on overtime.
And Mr. Chairman, is this something that when we look at the budget for 2021, we should probably take a look at? I mean, their total budget is, $500,000, but they're continuously, going over with overtime costs. I don't know if we look at maybe increasing their budget to possibly potentially maybe decreasing the overtime costs or not. But I think this is an area that, because it's been like this for so many years, that we should probably take a little deeper dive into what's going on over in waste. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we should take a look at it. 209% is a big number, but again, it's 500,000, which, is a big number to me, but compared to police overtime in terms of percentage of the budget, but it's certainly something to look at. Director Dumas.
Okay. Okay, so that's it on OT. Andre?
Next.
Andre, can you move oh, there he is. Okay. So this is consent decree, Department of Justice, and Councilman Casey and I were chatting a bit.
I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Councilman Plenzik, did you have a question on
Yes,
this?
I
Or the
did.
previous?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, to my honorable colleagues and to the director again, and I would concur with Councilman Casey's assessment there of waste collection. See what I understand. We were told with the addition.
You muted yourself.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. With the growth of waste collection, with the automated carts, that injuries with workman comp's claims would go down substantially, and that's why I think it's important we look, because again, with how things have changed in waste collection, they still have these high numbers of individuals getting hurt. That's something that should be of great concern to all of us. So I would hope that we could really get into that. The other question, following up on Councilman Griffin's line of questioning. So we know what the cost is from the standpoint of police overtime, but it was just not police overtime for the debate, Public Works and other departments and divisions. Do we happen to know what that dollar amount is?
I believe that Director Howard, Mr. Chair to the councilman, is collecting all of that. And the number that I gave between 500,000 and 600,000, the estimate does include all of the participants, which would include Public Works, it would include EMS, fire, and police, is what I understand.
Okay, and then, so Mr. Chairman, I hope we could receive that document with a, itemized breakdown of the various costs. We just want to make sure that the clinic and Case, who agreed to pay the freight, are going to do just that, pay the freight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director.
So this one, of course, is just a page on the consent decree. And it speaks to the financial activity of that 5-year or so agreement. And I was talking to Councilman Casey before we all got on. It appears that the court in law, Gary Singletary particularly, would have to speak to the specifics, but it appears that the court has extended our agreement, or is in process of extending our agreement another 2 years. That's a good thing because, of course, we didn't want another 5 years. So 2 years, I think, to do some compliance that has not been met in the first 5 years. And so they had stayed under budget. If you recall, we went out for, we got the court appointed them, and the court did do some form of competitive looking. And I think the city was involved. I think the law department was involved in the final selection. So they have stayed under budget as of yet. The 0 for October just means that we don't yet have that payment through November at the time that we did this report. So that's what we have there. So nothing unusual to report. And Councilman Casey asked me about some detail on their budget, and I will be sending him the DOJ budget. Well, send it to council and he'll get it. Andre? Okay, so the next page has to do with income tax, which I told you guys is one of the areas where we're impacted. And because businesses have closed and people have lost their jobs, we don't believe that these numbers are coming back in 2021. So what we gave you here is kind of a history, as we always do over the years of, our income tax collections. And then you can see where we got in, the 2.5%. But I did want to make note that our adjusted anticipated for due to COVID, we thought at the beginning 444 million. We're looking at probably now 410 million. So I wanted to point that out. And year to date, of course, we've collected the 327 through the end of October. Andre.
Next.
He's trying. Property tax. Okay. So then this slide, of course, speaks to our property tax, for which actually we had no diminished amount. It was very, very negligible on property taxes so far. And as we close the year, and on the local government fund, we came in almost exactly as projected. So we did okay on property taxes thus far. And that 69% only speaks to like settlements that come in, because it doesn't come monthly. It comes a few times a year. So by November, we'll be up to that, up to the number we're in. Okay, Andre? Andre? Okay. Now, the next one, this is a new page, and I did it because I was listening to a couple of other hearings, and council had some questions around COVID.
Chief, 1 second. Councilman Brancatel, you have a question on this slide or the previous?
I'm sorry, was the previous slide?
Okay.
Director?
He doesn't have to go back, but it was just more, the property taxes are as safe and comfortable as we feel right now. The delinquencies are growing.
Yes.
And it's going to catch up with us, as we know that taxes are always a year behind in collection. So as we look to 2021, this is an area that, much like the foreclosure crisis, we're going to have to pay close attention to, because we haven't been seeing, and even though we have through some of the CARES Act rent and utility support, we are not out of it. People are not collecting it, and we're concerned about the payments that this is going to have an impact on. So I just want to make sure we don't lose sight of that for next year.
I agree with that entirely.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you look at the CARES Act funding page, as I shared with Councilman Plinsick, we're at about 135 million of CARES Act funding, and it's federal funding, of course, as you can see in each one of the paragraphs there: coronavirus aid, relief, and economic security, which is where CARES comes from. And it was, of course, put together to support necessary expenses caused by the unprecedented COVID-19 public health emergency. And then cities, just like ours, of course, received some of this funding to cover expenses, increased personnel, operation, equipment, construction costs, everything that's kind of impacted by the pandemic, which we desperately needed given our loss of revenues. And then under the Federal CARES Act funding, it can be used to cover costs that are incurred from March 1, which is the beginning of the pandemic. So they allowed us to retro some of our costs as it relates to public safety, health, equipment, some of the additional personnel we needed, and some of the construction costs that we had, the reconfiguring of the buildings with the 6 feet and the plastic and the sanitization. So it allowed us to charge those things back, going back to the beginning of the pandemic. We anticipate expending the whole 135 million by way of available funding so that we can meet these requirements and have that additional funding. So Frank Badalamenti, who I believe was talking to you guys before, and a team is monitoring each one of the departments in terms of what they're spending so that we can then recover that cost through the CARES Act. So what I gave you on page 11, and Councilman Plinsick, I don't know if you have the report yet, but approximately 47.3 million will be used for first responder payroll, equipment, and supplies. That of course includes dispatching, pre-hospital medical care, community outreach, personal protective equipment, and supplies that are needed to help hopefully stop the spread of COVID and control the spread of COVID. So 47.3 million will be used for that. And in our year-end numbers, we've recovered some portion of that. We have another draw that's going to be coming in November from the funds, because unlike other times when we've received funds, they actually forwarded all of the funds to us. And then we have to draw on them if you put them in an escrow account. And then of course, we submit to the funder what we're using it for, drawing, and kind of get an okay from them and our auditors to make sure that we're doing it correctly. And then 46.5 million for general operations at Hopkins, which I shared with you when we looked at their losses that are associated with prevention, preparation, and response to COVID. 19.6 million for public health and support and its initiatives. And that's of course for personnel, personal protective equipment, and expenses related to contract tracing, precautions, outreach, health and human services to support activities and control the spread of COVID. So that's about 19.6 million of it. Next page, on page 12, 16.9 million for basic needs support. These are including the programs that Councilman Brancatelli were talking about: food assistance, homeless prevention, referral services, rent and utilities assistance, as well as senior and special needs services for the prevention, preparation, and response to COVID-19. Then $4 million for federal assistance to businesses. That includes the working capital funding for negatively impacted businesses as a result of COVID. And then $650,000 for technology and broadband access. And that has to do with our buildings, along with kind of some of the remote working for home. And so that's how the 135 will be expended. We have to submit detailed reports. They come in an audit, and they're pretty vast in terms of the size of the report. But when the reports are done and the audits are concluded, we'll share whatever detail council wants to see. But it is covered in each description here. So you won't see anything that you don't see described here. Okay. Let's see, I talked about that. I talked about SEIU and our own salary plan. Where the salary plan is concerned for fiscal 2020 and 2021. I talked about the union agreements. I talked about the 2.2 and 2, which turns into 5.5% in fiscal 2021 in terms of a bump. The court system has their own salary plan, which of course our negotiated agreements cover 19, 20, and 21. The courts have been instituting their salary plan for 19 and 20, and they institute their own salary plan. So in terms of increases and all of that. So our 2.2 and 2 will be consoles, staffing that is considered exempt, and the general fund that's exempt, and the court will continue to use their salary plan. And I talked about consent decree. Okay, and in fiscal 2021, in response to the number of retirements and vacancies in public safety, we are planning 3 classes for police, 2 classes for fire, and 2 for EMS. And they've already identified that they expect or anticipate or hope that these class sizes will be a lot larger. Generally, they come in between 45 and 50. They're trying to recruit like 80 for a class and hope that don't many people fall off after all the initial, kind of activity that they do to make sure that they, qualify and can be put on. But that's what we're planning for 2021 to hopefully seal, some of the vacancies and put people back into those positions that we've lost. This is a really, really, really difficult time. And I know some of you call sometimes. I try to get right back to you. It's been very difficult to try to maintain operations and try to maintain the safety of our employees. And you can see that we've not yet, have the public back in the building, because now the numbers are all turning in the wrong direction, not only in our area, but, nationwide. And so we had put together planning that was going to restore a 5-day abbreviated work week. And that planning now is put on hold, and we're putting in shorter work days in those areas where we have to collect revenue, or in those areas where we have to deliver service, public utilities, public works. Those individuals are still on 5 days, and in some instances on an abbreviated day, but trying to manage the spread of COVID and, be responsive to the safety of not only city employees, but everybody in the city has been a bit difficult, but we're managing.
Chief, I have a question on the COVID funds. I saw where it was part of it would cover payroll for first responders and the airport portion. Was there anything, we have been fortunate that we have not had to lay anybody off. Is there anything that covered just general payroll for parks or, our non-first responders?
Mr. Chair, the language that they gave us initially in the first disbursement was a bit more restrictive. You actually had to pull together duty sheets to kind of show that they were all operating in a COVID environment. I think that if there became a general sense that as long as they're first responders and the first people going out, that they're in danger of COVID every time they answer a call. So they did not grant funding for park maintenance or that kind of stuff, but they did allow us all of the public safety participants and all of the health people. Now, if we can demonstrate that park maintenance had to do something that was directly COVID related, we're allowed to do that, but we have to show the proof.
Got it. Thank you. Councilman Brancatelli?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And certainly, I do want to acknowledge some of the great work that's being done during the shutdown, certainly in finance and for contractors and vendors getting paid. I know it's been a challenge, but all indications that I have been hearing is checks have been going out. They're getting processed, contracts are getting processed. And certainly for places like building and housing and license and assessments that have had to adapt to online services. I've been Director Donald's personal guinea pig to pull online permits, and have found that the process actually has been much simpler than coming downtown in some cases, of having to park and go upstairs. But you can download plans and designs, and it seems like we really are adapting to this new world. And I think for the better as we learn how to operate out of City Hall. And certainly license and assessments, when we're talking about whether it's death certificates, birth certificates, a lot of growing pains, but it seems like folks are moving in the right direction. So congratulations on that. And I did want to look at, I know in community development and economic development, they've been processing an awful lot of contracts during COVID, especially during the CARES Act, where I think Director Ebersol said he processed some nearly 300 applications and halfway through on contracting for relief to businesses. Have we looked at if there is getting outside help or other opportunities to move some of that along? I know it's not just a matter of whether people are working in-house or outside remotely. I think it's just a volume issue for being able to process that much for a system that wasn't designed to process that much.
Right. Mr. Chair, to the councilman, yes. When those individuals, they give a biweekly report to mayor's office on my interim chief of staff thing. And so I look at those biweeklies, and they're supposed to report any operational issues that they may have. So they report them there, and then many times I'll receive a call and they will ask for temporary workers to help with some facet of, we're employing temporary workers now over in Vital Statistics to help with a backlog of requests for birth and death certificates. And as it relates to economic development, we're allowing, I don't know that they have enough latitude, like simplicity in what they do, that some outside person could come and help. But we are changing some of our due dates. Like today, they're supposed to bring down 20 more contracts. So we're changing some of our due dates in order to try to accommodate them. Many of the departments have asked for extended hours beyond our kind of, coronavirus restricted hours. And so I got that from community development. So he wants to work a few evenings in order to try to get some things out. And we're actually going to open the building on Saturday for him and finance so that we can all close out the year appropriately. So police and building maintenance are going to open the building, and we can do that. But so they are aware that if they need temporary help, we're getting those drawn in through our Schneider Blake contract. They have to be able to supervise them, like the contract tracers and people like that we have across the street in the public auditorium building, so that they can be supervised. So yes, we are assisting in any of those areas where they need that help.
That's great to hear, because I know it's it's great to see this many dollars coming in this fast to help our small businesses and nonprofits, but contracting it is just as important when it comes to being able to deliver those checks. And I know that places like Progressive Insurance, who has a similar issue of not having thousands of employees who are coming into their main headquarters, but they're actually loaning employees to Bureau of Workers' Comp to process claims for BWC.
Wow.
So I don't know if there's opportunities to work with some of these larger corporations that can loan staff out who aren't going into their workplace. But again, I understand your point that like an ED, that's pretty specialized work in doing that kind of contracting. So it's not as simple as filling out forms. Right now we're under a hiring freeze through the end of the year, or is that extended through until after budget hearing?
Our hiring freeze will be extended through 2021. And if in fact individuals again show that these people are essential, then we'll have to kind of work it to see if their operations or delivery of service are adversely impacted. Then we'll have to work it to see which way we can do it. Hopefully there'll be some unanticipated uptick in revenue. We did not anticipate the payments back from the Bureau of Workers' Comp. They've made a couple of big distributions, which came to like $18 million, which came back to the city. About 65% of that goes to general fund, and then we have to disperse it out to the other funds. But, as funds come in, when they made their budget request, they did make lots of requests for lots of more people. And so we kind of, just kind of put it to the side and said, as funds come in, we had the conversations around essential, non-essential. As funds come in, then we'll look at filling some of those spots.
Yeah, and I understand that. I think having a hiring freeze and looking at the circumstances while we're dealing through this pandemic, as much as I'd love to have new initiatives come on board and try and be creative in lots of different ways, this last election certainly at the top turned out the way we wanted, but we saw as Democrats, we have responsibility as a city, plow the streets, pave the streets, patch the potholes, pick up the trash, cut the lots, all those kind of things. We need to start doing well. I mean, we are doing a good job at it, but we really need to perfect on how we do that. I know Director Cox had a good discussion today in municipal services on, providing those basic services, is our core mission. And as much as we want to be more creative, I think getting through this pandemic and having a budget for next year that balances would be a Herculean effort. So thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chief.
All right. All right. Well, Chief, much appreciated. I don't see any other hands up. So I will see everybody Wednesday, if not before. I want to thank you for this update, and everybody should, again, start looking towards 2021 budget. And again, we will have both transfer and supplemental ordinance before December 9th. Thank you all so much, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.